Hello, class 9 children. Good morning. Today is Thursday, though you don't have your today's class yet. I'm trying to upload uh, your English paper 2 or English literature, the poem after Blenheim that we started in our last online class. So I want to get over with this poem as early as possible so that we can prepare ourselves for uh, your unit test. So let's come back to continue the poem after Blenheim written by Robert Southey, right? So out of the 11 stanzas we have in the poem, 5 of the stanzas we have already covered in our last online class. So the remaining 6 I'd like to conclude it today. So if you remember, let me give you a short recap of what we had done in the poem written by Robert Southey, a great English romantic poet. So in the poem we saw the poet is discussing about the war, and he talks about the French and the English war that took place on 13th August in the year 1704 in Blenheim in Bavaria, right? And I told you that it is a ballad, and a ballad is a song-like narrative poem, right? Here, Old Casper is one of the important characters other than his two grandchildren who are Peterkin and Wilhelmine. So here we saw the poem got opened on a summer evening. It was a summer time, and we see old Casper, who is a farmer. After his hard day's work got over, he is seated himself at his cottage door and taking the sun bath, right? Right in front of him there is a green patch of field in which we saw Wilhelmine, a granddaughter, was playing. Right? The start of the poem was very cozy, very ideal, very comfortable and peaceful. Okay, it was a nice, right, a view to look at, right, of this village cottage what we saw. And suddenly we move on to an occurrence in the second stanza, right? We saw the grandson, Peterkin, was playing on the bank of a small river, which we call here rivulet. There he finds a roundish object, a shiny object, which was round in shape and was playing with it. And as we know, most of the children are very much inquisitive to know what these things are. So he carried it and then brought it to his grandfather to ask. So he asked his grandfather to tell him what it was, which was something very roundish, smooth and large, right? So this is all because of the child's innocence, right? And he is unaware to know what the thing was. Okay, so the poet has brought us here the suspense in the poem, right? What was that roundy subject? We move on to the third stanza where we saw old Casper, who is an experienced person having lived his life for long years in this earth, right? Trying to make his grandson understand. The grandson was curious, he was very hopeful, he was eagerly waiting to know what that object was, right? And having faith in his grandfather, he had asked about it. The grandfather, after knowing it immediately what that object was, he then shook his head and then took a long audible breath and then told his grandchildren that it was a human skull, right, who had fallen in a great victory. Okay, he then further tells the grandchildren that it is a common occurrence in the field, that whenever he plows the field with his plowshares, many of such things, right, are seen coming out, right? So the war that has taken long years back, but the effect of it is still seen today. That was what here we see, right? And the grandfather said it was not just one or two, Many thousands have lost their lives in this great victory, he said. Okay. Now the children are very much eager to know much more about this war when they have just come to know that it was a war that killed many lives, right? So Peterkin becomes more curious about it, and then he asks curiously his grandfather, "Tell us more about this war," right? Whereas Wilhelmine, right, looks up, hoping that she is going to listen a fantastic story related by her grandfather, right? But you see, Shizuki stood there with a wonder waiting eyes to know. Okay. And then the children demanded, "Tell us, father, what that war was and why was the war?" They also asked about the reason of the war. Okay. So up to here we had done in our last online class. Now what happens more to complete this point? Here we go. So see, "It was the English," Casper cried, "who put the French to rot. But what they fought each other for, I could not well make out. But everybody said," quoth he, "that it was a famous victory." Now you see, the father, right, the grandfather, old Casper, right, began to explain to his grandchildren that it was the English, cried Casper. Casper cried. Cried here means said, right? Because he was very, very excited, right, thinking about the war and the famous victory. Okay, so he said it was the English who put the French to rot. Rot here means defeat. The French soldiers were defeated by the English soldiers in this war, right? So the grandfather related that uh, occurrence to his grandchildren, that it was the English who defeated the French soldiers. But what they fought each other for, I could not well make out. Make out means understand, right? So old Casper was very enthusiastic, and enthusiastically he said, right, the children about the war. But at the same time he said he was unknown about the reason of the war. He could not make out. He could not understand the reason of the war. Why did the war take place? He was unknown about this, right? But everybody said, quoth he, that it was a famous victory. However, old Casper quickly added and said, right, that here quoth means said or told, that it was a famous victory, right? So as a common man, old Casper is, he only had the idea that it was a famous victory. But why was the war there? He was not able to tell this. Okay, so it was the state propaganda and other commoners like him, right, who here the word everybody means, right, the state propaganda and any other commoner people like the old grandfather is, right? So they are unable to know the real reason why the war was fought, right? Followed now? So neither any people remembered, right, about that war, right, nor considered significant okay, by the common men to know about the reason of the war, right? So the old father Casper here says to his grandchildren that it was a war between English and the French, right, in which the French soldiers were defeated by the English soldiers, right? He very enthusiastically related this, right? But when it came to tell the reason to the children why the war was fought, here the grandfather was, right, unknown about the reason, as he could not well make out, he said, right? But everybody, there everybody refers to the state propaganda and the commoner people like old grandfather Casper was, right? He said that it was only a famous victory, right? So they had no knowledge, right, why the war was fought. Now let us move on to the next one. My father lived at Blenheim then, yon little stream hard by. They burned his dwelling to the ground, and he was forced to fly. So with his wife and child he fled, nor had he where to rest his head. Now see, Casper continued. He told about his parentage now, right? So Casper, when he himself was a child, right, what had happened at that time when the war took place? You see, right? Casper said, my father. Who is my here? Old Casper. When he was a child, his own father lived at Blenheim then, right, where the war took place. So at that time when the war took place, old Casper, right, and his parents used to dwell in that place, used to live in that place. Yon little stream hard by, yon means over there, right? Over there, little stream where the river flowed, right? Nearby. Hard by means nearby, right? So, uh, how old Casper's family suffered in this war, right? That's what he relates to his grandchildren. They burned his dwelling to the ground. So they refers to the soldiers who were engaged in the war. They burned his dwelling. Dwelling means house, where old Casper and his family lived, right? They burned to the ground. They burned the house to the ground. Ground means ashes. They burned the house into ashes, leaving nothing there, right? Okay, but his father, old Casper's father, right, thought for his family's safety. Okay, and so, right, he flew, right, he fled, right, to a safety place. He was forced to run away from there. Okay, so they burnt his dwelling to the ground. So the war people were engaged in the war, the soldiers, they burnt these houses where these people are living into ashes, right, making them run away, right, to find their own safety somewhere other place, right. So with his wife and child he fled. So with his wife and child, right, old Casper's father ran away from there. Fled means ran away, right, ran away from there, from the place Blenheim. Nor had he where to rest, but they were not able to find the place for shelter. They were not able to find a place for shelter, right. They could not get a sheltering place, right. That means they became homeless. That was the suffering, right, of the local people, right, when there was war. So you see, right, it tells us here that not only do the soldiers face problem when the war is created, but the common people also become the victims of the war, right, though they are not uh, a reason in this war, right. So old Casper related his own family's suffering, right, in connection to this war, right. Now move on to the next one. With fire and sword the country round was wasted far and wide, and many a childing mother then and newborn baby died. But things like that, must be at every famous victory. Now see, right? So old Casper added that war was raised. Okay, fire and sword here means fire means burning, right? And sword means killing. Okay, so Casper added the war raised, right, with burning and killing, right? The country round, that means the destruction was all over the country. It was not to a concentrated place. It was not to a particular place. The whole country suffered here because of this war. When the war was raised, there were killings, there were burnings, there were dying everywhere, right. Was wasted far and wide. Wasted means destroyed, right, ruined, right. So not a country, right. uh, uh, people got here, saved, right. Everywhere there was seen destruction and destruction, okay, right. And this destruction was seen quite a far of distance even, right. Wide here means far of distance. So the destruction covered not only a small place, right. It covered a wide stretch of place. The whole country was suffering here with the burnings and killings and dyings, right. So see, and many a childing mother then, and many a childing, here childing means pregnant, the women who were pregnant, right, they also died, right, with the babies in their wombs. Okay, then a newborn baby died, and the newborn baby also lost their life. So such was the incident that occurred when there was war, right. Many pregnant women died, right, and along with the pregnant women, those who were unborn, right, children, babies, they also lost their life, right. And the newborn babies who were just now born, they also lost their lives. Okay, but things like that, must be at every famous victory. Okay, so there was scene, right, the scene of tragic, right, in this war, right, that innocent people lost their lives, or innocent lives were lost. Okay, so it was a very horrifying sight to see, right? The outcome of the war, right? When there was war, right? Many innocent people lost their lives, like the pregnant women, like the babies, the unborn babies, right? Common citizens, they lost their lives. Such was the scene, right? Which was very, very tragic. So, which was very, very horrible, terrible to see, right? But look at here confidently what did the old Casper say. But things like that, he's telling to his grandchildren, must be at every famous right victory. That means it's a very, very quiet, right now, common scene that happens when you are going to attain a famous victory, when you are going to achieve a very famous victory, right? That's what he says. So, which means must be here means inevitable, right? They are bound to happen at every famous victory. So such kind of sights are commonly seen, right, at a very common victory, right, at a very common, right, famous victory that is achieved, right, by anyone. That is what here old Casper say. Okay, now see next. They say it was a shocking sight after the field was won, for many thousand bodies here lay rotting in the sun. But things like that, must be after a famous victory. Now you see, right? The war came to an end, right? Now this portion refers to the aftermath of the war, right? And the poet tells you that after the aftermath of the war was very shocking, right? So what was it? They say it was a shocking sight. Shocking here means surprising. Okay, the aftermath of the war was a very, very uh, surprising sight to see. After the field was won, field here means battle. After the battle was won, right, by the British, by the English against the French, right, the place was strewn. The battle where it had taken place was strewn with it was spread with, right, many thousand dead bodies lying here, lying there, right? So thousands of, right, soldiers were killed, thousands of people were killed in this war, in this battle, right? That is the aftermath, right? It's like that you are seeing. So when the war got over, right, there was a shocking sight to see. The place was strewn with, right, thousands of dead bodies, right, lay rotting in the sun, and these dead bodies were left, right, to be rotted in the sun, right? Why? It is because it was difficult, right, now to make arrangement uh, for the proper burial of these dead bodies, because there were lots and lots of, right, now dead bodies there. Okay, so since there were lots and lots of dead bodies, right, so a proper, right, burial was not made on the died soldiers or died people there, because there were plenty of them, right? That's why they were left open in the sun, right, to get rotted, right, by the sunset. Okay, so how dangerous was the sight, how horrible was the sight, you can imagine here, right? Okay, where dead bodies were even not buried. Okay, but things like that, but look at the confident old Casper. He says, but things like that, right, are common sights, are common happenings when you want a famous victory, he said. Okay, right? Now move on to the next. Great praise the Duke of Marlborough won, and our great Prince using. Why, it was a very wicked thing, said little Wilhelmine. Nay, nay, my little girl, quoth he, it was a famous victory. Now see, okay, so after the war got over, everybody admired, right? Everybody praised the Duke of Marlborough, right? The Duke of Marlborough was uh, the English commander, right? He was the commander of the English force, and it is because of him, right? The war was won to his side, right? Along with, right, Prince Eugene. Now, Prince Eugene was another successful military commander, right? He was another successful military commander from Austria, right? So see, so both of these men fought valiantly against, right, uh, the French soldiers, and brought victory for the British, brought victory for the English. right? And thus these two were praised by all people. Everybody admired the Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene, right, for their braved, right, for the brave, act that they did in this war, right? Then see why it was a very wicked thing, said little Wilhelmine, right? But the granddaughter, Wilhelmine, right, no? She stood protesting her grandfather, saying that, right, it was a very wicked thing that happened, right? That war was a very wicked thing that happened, not at all to be praised by anyone, because there were lots and lots of killings like that, right? Okay, so granddaughter Wilhelmine, perhaps is very sensitive at her heart, right? She is after all a little girl, right? And so she is very soft at her heart and protested her grandfather, saying that, right, it was a very, very wicked thing that happened, right? Not at all to be praised by anyone. Okay, but to her, the grandfather, here says, admonishing her, right? The old Casper admonishes her granddaughter Wilhelmine and says, right? What he says is, nay, nay, means no, no, right? My little girl, said he, quoth he, right? It was a famous victory. So don't say like that, right? No, 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 my dear, little granddaughter, right? It was a famous victory that was brought, he said, right? Then the concluding stanza, you see, and everybody praised the Duke, who this great fight did win. But what good came of it at last? Quoth little Peterkin. Why, that I cannot tell, said he, but it was a famous victory. So you see, right? Old Casper goes on trying to justify the war, right? By saying that, in this last stanza, what did he do? Old Casper goes on trying to justify the war by saying that everybody praised the Duke, right? Who the Duke is? Duke of Marlborough, the British commander, right? And even, right, the Austrian commander, Prince Eugene, right? So see, who this great fight did win, right? So he goes on trying to, right, now say, right, justifying that everybody praised the Duke because, right, he had won this great victory. He had brought this great victory, right? But what good came of it at last? At last means at the end, right? Quoth little Peterkin. But Peterkin had a question to ask, right? He questioned his grandfather at the end, right? Saying, what good came of it at the last, right? There was a fight that took place. It was a famous victory that happened. But what was the good of it at the end? He asked, right? As he could not make out, as he could not understand, right? Why the Duke was praised, why Prince Eugene was praised here. So he questioned his grandfather, right? What good came out of it at the last of the war, right? Then old Casper says, why? Why means well, that I cannot tell, right? So old Casper says, right, well, I have no answer to this. I don't know, right? I don't understand, said he. But it was a famous victory. But he repeatedly, right, insisting the grandchildren, he kept on telling that it was a famous victory. So you saw, right, what was the outcome of the war? That war is useless, it is senseless, right? It is always destruction at the end. Okay, there is no positiveness when there is war, right? So at the same time, we have come to know that the poem brings to highlight, right, horrors of war, right? Whenever there is war, there are horrors, right? This now, and we keep the record of what had happened, right? And thus the common men are here brainwashed, right? This now, the common people are brainwashed here regarding war, right? So according to the poet Robert Southey, right, he is here, right, against the war. So he has given us an anti-war poem, right, after Blenheim, right? So which tells us here that war should not be fought, right? So this is the end of our poem. It was a beautiful poem, right? Hope you liked it, right? Now revise this poem at home, okay? And we are left with only one poem to cover our syllabus, okay? So that poem we'll leave it for the next time, right? And after the unit test, I think we'll carry on with our textbook, The Merchant of Venice. Thank you very much.